And hello again. Picking up from where I left off in the last video, it has definitely been a while since I did any of these commentaries, of course, and unfortunately what happened was I did continue on with the video, but I had to, this is my actually third time making it, simply because there were technical problems. Sometimes that happens with iPhones. They run out of battery in the middle of it. Like it'll be at like 50%, which is usually enough to make a video, and then before you know it, the 50% was like wrong to begin with, and it simply runs out of battery in the middle of the video. Really, making videos doesn't take that much battery power out of an iPhone unless the videos are really long, and even then. But sometimes iPhones do really weird things. During this holiday season, I just wanted to give like a very short plug about this because it actually ties into what I'm going to talk about. The Carol Burnett Show, The Lost Episodes DVD set. I actually bought this like 4 or 5 years ago as a Christmas present to myself at that time, 2018 or 19. I think it came out in 2015. This is like literally the best DVD set of a TV series that I can even possibly remember or know of. It's just, they really did a fantastic job with it. And the one thing that they did do, which I think is really the best part, is they left the cameras rolling. Although they edited them like into segments, they left the cameras rolling for all these interviews that they did with about 25 different actors and writers who wrote for the show, maybe even more than 25, spread out over these discs. And I remember when we did the Twilight Zone interviews, we interviewed like about 25 writers and actors who had worked on Twilight Zone. Once it was sold over to the production company, they chopped it way down to like 6 minutes a piece. And luckily they turned out okay, but there was a lot of stuff that some of the actors said that was completely chopped out, and some of it was very interesting information, but I have no idea where there's the proverbial cutting room floor, but I don't know where the original film is at this moment in time. But if you like the Carol Burnett Show, this is definitely something that you should have. It is actually not lost episodes, for these episodes are on YouTube. But with YouTube nowadays, there's all this, these commercials and stuff like that. These are uncut, completely uncut, commercial-free, and aired in their entirety just the way they were back in the 60s and 70s. So now that I've started with that, I've got to tie this into what I'm going to talk about for this tape. And the 3 episodes that were on this tape, Sounds and Silences, Mr. Bevis, and Mute. And I'll start with Mr. Bevis first. Mr. Bevis was one of those guardian angel stories that Serling sort of had a weakness for or a penchant for, and it was intended as a CBS spin-off starring Orson Bean and Henry Jones, which never got picked up. And then a couple years later, he tried it again with Carol Burnett, who by that time I think had finished her run on the Gary Moore Show, and they wanted to get something going with Carol Burnett and Jesse White, who was also quite well known at that time. And later, I think, really gained most of his fame through the commercials that he did for the Maytag refrigerators and other things. He was a great character actor and also a commercials guy. So, Mr. Bevis is basically a traditional sort of guardian angel story, and about this guy named Bevis who kind of we see him sort of bumble through the day and lose his job and get evicted from his apartment and everything, and he basically makes the acquaintance of this guardian angel named J. Hardy Hempstead, played by Henry Jones, who was a very prolific character actor and film actor. And I think most people probably know him for his 2-year run on Phyllis with Cloris Leachman. And I think Cloris might have recruited him for the part because she worked with him on Night Gallery. So they knew each other, and he was very good and kind of entertaining as her father-in-law on the sitcom Phyllis that ran for a couple years. So Orson Bean, everybody knows, he was a very funny guy, comedic actor, although he did have some dramatic roles, one of which I know was his appearance on Will and Grace as one of Will's old college professors. And he co-starred in that with Piper Laurie, who just died here not too long ago. But Orson died a couple years ago, sadly. He was hit by a car and never recovered. I think it was late at night and crossing the street or something like that. But he did have a long life. He lived 91 years. So he was one I never met, but I only heard very good things about him from people who knew him. So Mr. Bevis, without recapping the whole thing, it really, the distinction of it was, maybe because it was intended as a spin-off, was that it had a lot of actors in it who were very, very good, and familiar faces on TV at that time. One of them was Dorothy Newman, who played Otis Campbell, the town drunk of Andy Griffith's show. She played his wife. She has a part on there. And then also Charles Lane, who lived to be about 105 years old and was on television so frequently for 4 decades. Like he was in like every other episode of TV from like the 50s up through the 80s, and died at a very old age. And of course Henry Jones and William Shallert, dear old William Shallert, who, same thing for Charlie Lane, he was a very prolific character actor. And also House Peters Jr., who both Shallert and Peters came to our Twilight Zone conventions, both very nice guys. And House Peters, I think, was known kind of like Jesse White for his work on commercials more than anything else. But anyhow, so that was Mr. Bevis. Also on this tape was Sounds and Silences from the 5th season of the show, which was kind of a forgettable, kind of lame script by Serling, but it was kind of funny in its own way. Directed by Richard Donner. It's about this guy who loves loud noise because he was traumatized as a child, lived in a household where they didn't like any loud noise, and he kind of bumbles through the day, kind of like Mr. Bevis does, and bumbles through the day, and only he doesn't have a guardian angel. His wife, played by Penny Singleton, leaves him and leaves him in the lurch, and by the end, end of this whole thing, he's kind of gone, made a 180. He's become like, he goes deaf and insane, and starts clamoring for people to make more noise. And it's not totally without its charm. I mean, even some of the least of Twilight Zone were still funny, and Sounds and Silences was funny, but in its own sort of peculiar way. But it did bear the distinction of being one episode that was not aired for 20 years. The first 20 years of its lifetime was spent basically in oblivion, packed away on a shelf someplace. The film was packed, put away on a shelf, and not aired until 1984. And then at which point it entered, syndication and public domain, got onto the Twilight Zone videotapes and DVDs and so on and so forth. Penny Singleton lived to be a very, very old lady as well. I keep talking about all these people who lived a long time and were old. She was definitely one of them, and she was going to attend our first Twilight Zone convention, but she broke her shoulder and was not able to sign autographs anymore, and she I think called in with her regrets, saying, I just can't do this. I wanted to so much, but it would have been nice to have her there, because I think the oldest people we had there were 88. There were a few guys there who were like 88 years old, and she would have been even older than them. So, but she had a legendary career herself, going back to like the 1930s when she appeared on those Blondie films, and then of course she was the voice of Jane Jetson, which everybody on the planet knew her for. And finally, Mute, from the 4th season of the show, 4th season of half-hour episodes. Definitely not one of the more popular of Twilight Zone episodes, and the reason for it really was because of, I think, the way the teleplay was written in comparison to the short story by Richard Matheson. Sometimes I have trouble saying his name. I don't know. Richard Matheson. Anyway, so the short story featured a male protagonist, a young boy named Paul Nielsen, Paal, and it was replaced. For some reason, the Twilight Zone story editors or production staff, wanted a female character, and it was definitely a good move because they got Ann Gillian, who did a fantastic performance, which really remains the only thing it really has to recommend it. And as I say, I think the teleplay really kind of took a number of wrong turns, and especially it was especially borne out in the two female, other than Ann Gillian, the other two female leads, and also the lead of the sheriff, played by Frank Overton. So Frank Overton really as has been noted elsewhere, displays none of the warmth or sensitivity as he did in Walking Distance a few years before that, or in To Kill a Mockingbird, or that he did in To Kill a Mockingbird, which was done like the year before in 1962. But Barbara Baxley, who played his wife, Cora, really just, I think, goes far to the extreme, not only in the way that she portrayed the character, but in the way that I think the character was written. And ditto for the character of Miss Frank, who was the school teacher. Now, to have two, bitchy, I won't call them protagonists, they're antagonists. To have two bitchy roles like that in one episode, one is really pushing it. We see one maybe, in episodes like A Stop at Willoughby and Matheson's A World of Difference. Stop at Willoughby by Serling and A World of Difference by Matheson. But to have two of them in one episode is just, proved to be over the top. And it really just did not work. And to go back, hearkening back to some of my days on the old Twilight Zone message boards, I remember there was one person who said, the first time I saw it, I didn't even know that it was Twilight Zone until the ending credits rolled. It looked like some sort of wicked old family drama. And then another guy said all copies of Mute and a few other episodes, The Encounter and The Hunt by Hamner and The Howling Man, I think were among them, should all be recalled and burned in a big bonfire. So, needless to say, this was an episode that was just over the top. I think it really pushed it too far. And once in a while, Twilight Zone would go a little bit too far. Not often. Only, it only maybe happened a few times over 5 years, but this was definitely one of those times. So, like Sounds and Silences, it was not in syndication along with any of the other hour-long episodes. It was not in syndication for 20 years and really was not known by anybody much until the 1980s, when finally those hour-long episodes went into syndication. So, but just to comment a little and wrap this up on the two female characters, Barbara Baxley plays this housewife of the sheriff who believes that Ilsa Nielsen, whose parents, without recapping the whole plot, parents who died in a house fire, but she herself gets out. She imagines or thinks that Ilsa coming into their home as an adopted daughter is like her own dead daughter returned to her because her biological daughter drowned in a lake. And, so we see her kind of go throughout the whole thing, trying to block the possibility of Ilsa ever having to go back to Germany and being taken away from her. So her husband, the sheriff, gets a hold of some addresses through mail that has come to their house, addresses from people in Germany, and he writes letters to them. And as soon as he writes them and goes off to work in the morning, we see her burning those letters in a pan on the stove in the kitchen, which in itself is just absolutely disturbing. And followed by Ilsa, who runs down the stairs smelling the smoke, and she sees this, and she knows what's happened. She runs out into the street and nearly gets hit by a car, and there are all these onlookers who are like, she almost just got hit and everything, and then outruns Cora and just screams, "Leave her alone!" And then, of course, the ending comes where the people from Germany come over to the United States, to German Corners, Pennsylvania, and try to, they want to take her back with them, but by then she's really lost her powers of telepathy. But, comes another hysterical, overacted sort of fit of Barbara Baxley saying, "You can't take her away from me." And then we come to Miss Frank, the school teacher, who runs her classroom like an army barracks. She's like a drill sergeant. She runs her class like, with clenched teeth and yardsticks, and, it's all about conformity and working with her, to quote the script, working with her until she's exactly like everybody else. So, her character was very disturbing. But I think Irene Daler was a very nice lady, and she did write me a note one time and said, that was only my second time in Hollywood. She said, I was always based in the New York theater community in New York. And she said, it was only my second time, and they flew us out. She said, we started flying out. They'd always fly us out for the juicy roles to Hollywood. And she said, Stuart Rosenberg was always a joy to work with, the director who directed Mute. She said, working with him was always a joy, and he later cast me in the Amityville horror film or films later on. So, despite being, both she and Barbara Baxley were very good actresses, but at the same time, the parts they were given were quite, as I say, over the top. So, as I say, it does take a number of really wrong turns that just about send it over the cliff. It is not popular. I've never really heard many people say anything all that good about it. But it was kind of one of those examples of one of the hour-long episodes that failed, even though they had more time to work with this more complicated thesis. So they did have more time, but unfortunately it just kind of didn't go. And at the end, it's sort of made out to be, we see the last shot of the show with Barbara Baxley and Ann Gillian walking down the street, happy as clams. And in defending it, Matheson said, well, she lost her parents, but now she's going to have a better life without telepathy. And it's kind of up to the viewer to decide which is the better. That's always kind of how Twilight Zone was. It's like, we leave it to the viewer to make the call on it. But he also mentioned, Matheson also mentioned at the time, he said, I wrote it in a deliberately professional way. Well, I think he wrote everything in a professional way. But I think it was probably, one of his short stories that, he should have picked another one, because the man he wrote so much material, and they probably just should have picked something else. So that is my commentary on Mute, Sounds and Silences, and which was not in syndication, along with a few other episodes and all the 18-hour-long episodes for the first 20 years of Twilight Zone history. And Mr. Bevis, which was later remade kind of as Cavender is Coming, with the protagonist changed to female. All these things changed. In Mute, protagonist changed from male to female, and then again also in Cavender is Coming, which was a remake of Mr. Bevis from the first season. So until next time, and I will try to do more of these commentaries, but because I tend to get so busy, no guarantees, but thank you for watching.